Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Tuesday, the 11th day of November, 2025. And as always, we find some huge headlines in the news today, headlines that support what the Bible has to say, what our world's going to look like at the time of the end of the age and for the return of Jesus Christ and the many events that are predicted to precede it. Here are the headlines. First, from the Jerusalem Post. Trump's Gaza plan stalls as Western officials warn Hamas is regaining control. They're just now finding this out? All right, our second headline, also from the Jerusalem Post, and this one is fascinating. U.S. considering plans to build large military base on the Israel-Gaza border. Okay. And finally, from the Times of Israel, from tears for Arafat to death to the idea of how the BBC's Israel coverage has gone from bad to worse. And I can testify that firsthand, living in Australia for 4.5 years and watching the BBC News all the time and seeing how anti-Semitic they have been. All right, these three headlines continue to precisely support what the Bible has to say about the situation of our world in the last days. And as always, we're going to explain how each one fits in based on the predictions of Scripture. We're going to cite our book, 25 Signs We're Near the End, because they fit the signs we list that the Bible gives us about the end of the age. And so we'll do that as we do every single day here on Breaking News, twice a day. Again, the website is Educating Our World, and the book is 25 Signs We're Near the End. It's a free download under the heading of Bible Prophecy. And also, for us in the U.S. today, it's Veterans Day. If you see a veteran day, thank him or her for their service. If you're at a restaurant, don't let them pay for their meal. Tell them their money's no good here. You make sure you pay for it. And again, thank them for what they have done to us. We are so thankful for people, the first responders, the police, fire, the veterans, anybody who protects us. We're very, very thankful for. So today is the day we recognize them, and our hearts go out to them, particularly those who have given their lives in service to this country so we can have the freedoms that we do. All right, let's get the headlines. First of all, headline number one. Um, this is, I don't know how to even say anything about this first one. Trump's Gaza plan stalls as Western officials warn Hamas is regaining control, from the Jerusalem Post. I mean, they're only finding out now. It's been a month since the plan was instituted. Western officials, quoted by Reuters, warn that the Gaza Strip is fracturing into two entities, one under Israeli control and the other under Hamas. And as implementation of form, it says it's funny how these uh, people who write these stories, former U.S. president, he's still the U.S. president. This is in the Jerusalem Post. Boy, they have some bad editing here. Implementation of U.S. President Donald Trump's post-war plan remains stalled. The lack of progress, they said, could lead to years of separation. According to the plan's first phase, enacted October 10th, Israel currently controls about 53% of Gaza's territory. That would mean Hamas has, what, 47%, if our math is right, including, this is Israel, some large agricultural zones, Rafah in the south, and parts of Gaza City. Nearly all of Gaza's 2 million residents have been forced into tent camps, and the ruins of shattered neighborhoods still under Hamas's control, and therein lies the problem. And then a heading here, U.S. pressure on Israel over Rafah terrorists. Though this adds to the complications. Amidst the political deadlock, Washington is reportedly pressing Israel to allow safe passage for about 200 Hamas terrorists trapped in tunnels beneath Rafah on the Israeli-controlled side of the so-called Yellow Line. Under one idea, the terrorists would surrender and hand over their weapons in exchange for amnesty or exile, while the tunnels would be destroyed. The pressure has intensified during a visit to Israel by Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and one of the architects of this failed Gaza plan. As Israeli official told Ynet News that given the pressure, it's hard to believe we'll eliminate them. No kidding. There's heavy U.S. involvement. It would likely be resolved through a negotiated deal. Hamas not going to negotiate. Washington believes that after the return and burial of Lieutenant Hadar Golden's remains, again, it's a sad story. He was there 4,118 days, 11 years after his 2014 abduction. Prime Minister Netanyahu may now have greater political latitude to advance the plan. However, Netanyahu's office said he did not commit to the Americans to release the Rafah terrorists. Here's the question. One comment was rather interesting in this. I don't know if it's from an Israeli or an American, but his comment on an Israeli website. He said, you've had a dead body that's been there for 11 years, and it's great he's come back, but you let 200 murderers go because of that? Great question. All right, we move on to the yellow line becomes a de facto border, and this herein lies the problem. The next stage of the Trump plan envisions a further IDF withdrawal beyond the yellow line, creation of a transitional government authority, deployment of a multinational force to replace Israeli troops, Hamas's disarmament, and the start of reconstruction. Yeah, but no timelines or enforcement mechanisms have been agreed upon. Hamas refuses to disarm, Israel opposes any Palestinian Authority involvement, and uncertainty persists over the multinational force. We're still working out ideas, Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi said this month at a security conference in Manama. Everybody wants this conflict over. All of us want the same end game here. Question is, how do we make it work? And it's a great question. Without a major U.S. push to break up the impasse, the yellow line could become the de facto border, dividing Gaza indefinitely, according to 18 sources, including 6 European officials and former U.S. officials familiar with the talks. The U.S. has drafted a UN Security Council resolution that would grant the transitional authority and multinational force a 2-year mandate, but 10 diplomats told Reuters that governments remain reluctant to commit troops. And we've been talking about this. European and Arab nations in particular were unlikely to participate if the mission extended beyond peacekeeping and required direct confrontation with Hamas. Yeah, nobody wants to fight Hamas. Reconstruction only on the Israeli side. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Kushner have proposed sending reconstruction funds first to Israeli-controlled areas, creating model zones for some Gazans to live in. But analysts, at the International Crisis Group warn that the idea could lock in fragmented reality and entrench division for the long term. In other words, that just solidify Hamas gets the other half. U.S. State Department spokesman said tremendous progress has been made in advancing the plan, but acknowledged more work was needed without saying whether rebuilding would be limited to the Israeli controlled side. They continue to say tremendous progress. No, they have not made tremendous progress. Netanyahu has insisted Israel has no intention of reoccupying or governing Gaza, though some far right ministers have called for reviving the settlements dismantled in 2005. The IDF likewise opposes direct rule, preferring to maintain a buffer zone inside Gaza to prevent future attacks like that of October 7th. And then the last heading here, new reality on the ground. Israeli forces have placed large yellow concrete blocks along with the withdrawal line and are building infrastructure on the side they control. In Gaza City, Shujaiya neighborhoods, journalists were shown fortified Israeli outposts established after the ceasefire. Satellite images show how earth and debris bulldoze into steep mounds, forming elevated vantage points. In other words, they're building their own border here on the Israeli side. The IDF spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani, said the soldiers are there to prevent terrorists from crossing into the Israeli-controlled zone, and Israel would further move once Hamas meets its obligations. As soon as Hamas holds their part of the agreement, we are ready to move forward, he said. And that's the article. And my first response is, and that will be never. Hamas has made it clear they have no intention of agreeing to the Trump plan, where they will have to disarm and cede power. So, as it's beginning to dawn on more and more people, this plan is unworkable in its present form. Either Israel is allowed to go into Gaza and destroy what is left of Hamas, or the yellow line becomes the new border between Hamas and Israel. And if so, then Hamas wins the victory. October 7th, 2023 was a success, and of course will be repeated again and again, seeing that at the end of the day, Hamas didn't have to pay a heavy price for the massacre. Now, signs 6 and 7 come to mind here. Sign 6, Israel will constantly be in the world's spotlight. And sign number 7, there'll be a continual search for peace in Israel. Both of these are true now. The whole world's talk about Israel here, what to do. It's, and blaming them for being attacked, many of them. And then no peace. Again, well, we'll just have to, let Hamas stay, and it'll be, 53-47 Israel on the one side, Hamas on the other. That's kind of where it's going, unless something huge happens, and that would have to be allowing the Israelis to finish the job. But every single day, like we've said, Hamas becomes more and more entrenched. They're rebuilding, rearming, recruiting more terrorists. So it's just a terrible situation, and there's no real answer to it. Okay. But this headline number 2 is something fascinating. Would never have seen this coming. Now, let's see about it. U.S. considering plans to build large military base on Israel-Gaza border, from the Jerusalem Post. The prospective site would allegedly be capable of housing thousands of American troops and serve future international stabilization efforts. The U.S. is exploring plans to build a large military base along Israel's border with Gaza, according to an investigative report by Shomrim on Tuesday. The prospective site would allegedly be capable of housing thousands of American troops and serve future international stabilization efforts, according to the article. The IDF sources said they were either unaware or had few details about the new concept of a large scale U.S. base on Israel's border with Gaza, which could hold thousands of American soldiers. And then one of the headings here in this article, the base could enhance U.S. ability to directly control events on the ground in Gaza. According to reports, part of the purpose of the base would be to enhance the United States' ability to directly control events on the ground and to be less reliant on Israeli cooperation in dealing with diverse parties, whether Hamas, Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, or other third parties in managing Gaza. That said, the IDF's unfamiliarity with the idea means it may still not happen, or it may be a more distant idea that would take time to negotiate and bring to fruition. Alternative, Netanyahu may already have agreed to such change without informing the IDF, something he has done from time to time on issues with sensitive political implications for him. Now, what's interesting, remember we've got this, excuse me, the CMCC, the Civil Military Coordination Center. That's the new center that's open in Kiryat Gat in Israel. That's open in October. However, the office is expected to hold no more than a couple of hundred American soldiers and allied officials, which give it more of a coordinating purpose than the ability to act independently and concretely in the field. U.S. CENTCOM officials have described the CMCC near Kiryat Gat as a hub for coordinating international humanitarian and military channels tied to Gaza, saying it began operating late October and aims to streamline decision-making across partners. During a visit to the site, Prime Minister Netanyahu said disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza will be achieved as senior IDF officials joined him in a tour of the facilities. All right, this building a base here, it's an interesting idea. A big American base with thousands of soldiers on the border, but it's hard to see the U.S. following through with building this military base. Why is that? Well, opposition is going to come from everywhere, including from here in the U.S. The Republican Party, Trump's own party, has many anti-Semitic members at its base, as well as those who are fed up. They're isolationists, fed up with America getting involved in other wars where we have problems, many we face in our own country. And so, in fact, such a proposal may lead to further rejection of support for Israel, seeing that they're involved in a never-ending war with their neighbors in the Middle East. And that's one of the mantras that comes over and over again. And they say, why should we get involved in this? These people have been fighting with each other since the time of Abraham. Nothing's going to be settled here. Why should we put our soldiers and men and women in harm's way there when they can't ever figure it out for themselves? We have other problems in the world, namely Russia, Ukraine, and the huge one, of course, with China. And so the idea of a huge military base there on the border, can't see it happening. Now, if this does happen, if the blowback will be very huge against this, it'll fulfill sign number 11. No superpower will intervene on Israel's behalf when they are invaded. Ezekiel 38:39. Something's going to happen to the United States, and the United States, like us at J.D. Vance says, we just want to forget it, basically, the Middle East, and move on to other places, get something settled. And they're trying to do it through the Palestinian Authority running Gaza, the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia helping out, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so we'll see what happens. It's fascinating. But nothing is settled. Now, headline number 3 basically says it all. You might have heard this story: from tears for Arafat to death to the IDF. How the BBC's Israel coverage has gone from bad to worse. Now, there's a story that's hit the news. You've probably seen it. Top bosses at the BBC have quit over a documentary about Trump. They edited his January 6th speech when he was in power, making it look like he didn't ask for people to act peacefully. Trump is threatening to sue the BBC for like $1 billion over this, and the top bosses have already been fired or quit there. But there's something else going on here. Not only what they did to Trump, long-standing allegations of anti-Israel bias have soured British Jews' confidence in the national broadcaster. In the end, it was revelations concerning the manner in which the BBC's flagship current affairs program, Panorama, spliced together clips of a speech by U.S. President Donald Trump on January 6, 2021, that forced the corporation's boss and head of news to quit on Sunday. But Director General Tim Davie and Deborah Turnus, the chief executive of BBC News, have been in the firing line for months over allegations of bias. not the least because of the national broadcaster's coverage of anti-Semitism, the war in Gaza, and Israel more generally. As the Board of Deputies of British Jews, an umbrella communal group, noted Sunday, the Jewish community's concerns about the BBC's coverage of the Middle East stretched back long before October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked on southern Israel and murdered 1,200 people, at least in one day, and kidnapped 251 people and brought them to Gaza, and then the ensuing war in the Strip. Last year, a report that was compiled by researchers led by British Israeli lawyer Trevor Asserson included AI, I guess he used that with him, and analyzing the first 4 months of the broadcaster's coverage of the war in Gaza. It suggested that the BBC breached its own breached its own editorial guidelines more than 1,500 times during that critical phase of the conflict. The report also found the corporation's coverage of the conflict, Israel was associated with genocide more than 14 times more than Hamas. The following is a glimpse into the major incidents that led to recent accusations of anti-Israel bias at the BBC, an institution funded by all Britons through the compulsory license fee. Yeah, they fund the BBC, by the way, the Brits do, and the response from the Jewish community. Then you got a heading, terrorist. What terrorist? The BBC's coverage of the Gaza conflict sparked immediate controversy when it doggedly refused to label Hamas fighters terrorists, instead adopting the more neutral term militants. While the decision caused anger among politicians, Jewish groups, and leading lawyers, senior BBC journalists defended the corporation's stance by pointing to its founding ethos and requirement to stay objective, claiming that terrorism is a loaded word which people use about an outfit they disapprove of morally. Close quote. That's the end of the article. All right. Let me just say, as one who used to watch the BBC, I lived in Australia for 4.5 years, and we got the BBC every day. The news came on there, and they were the most anti-Semitic, anti-Israel group you could imagine. They've always been that way. Okay, so this story fits sign 21. There'll be a rise in anti-Semitism. The entire world will be against Israel. And so we see that more and more. We've got another story coming up in our second edition of breaking news about how Belgium is turning into the new Lebanon and the anti-Semitism that's there. A young lady's story about growing up there and how it was idyllic for quite a long time until mosques were built, imams come in and start, preaching hate and that. And now people fear for their lives and go into certain, areas of Brussels and other places. So we'll do that in the second edition of Breaking News. All right, here again, the headlines are screaming out to us about God's word about the time of the end is being fulfilled exactly as written. So are we listening here? Every day we see we see these stories. So we must pay attention to them as we see God's word being fulfilled right before our very eyes. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.